Today we're going to give you an overview of how to service your CVT, primarily your slipper clutch, your torque spring, and your clutch shoe springs. First thing we're going to do is get the quad up on a stand so that we can get to it with ease as we take the CVT cover off and get ready to perform all these tasks. This quad is a 90cc Apex with an overrange kit and a slipper clutch. We're going to start by taking off the CVT cover, but first we're going to get up here where we can get a better view of it. We're going to go ahead and take the air filter cover off along with the air filter so that as we begin to work on this thing, you guys can get a better view of what we're doing here. The first thing we want to do is go ahead and remove the bolts from the outer CVT cover. This is what holds your CVT cover on. So you make your rounds around those, get those off, and get this CVT cover out of the way so we can expose the belt and the clutches and the variator. When the cover comes off, you can see you have the front variator. The nut there has to come off. The outer half of that pulley comes off. As you take that off, it exposes the belt. At this point, you want to go ahead and remove the nut on the rear, which will allow you to disassemble and remove the clutch bell. Now this will leave exposed the slipper clutch disc itself. There you have both halves of the front and rear. Go ahead and remove the slipper disc from the rear, and if you'll slide that out just a little bit, there's a spacer that sits behind there. Go ahead and remove that before you lose it, and I just usually lay it up there and put those out of the way. Put a little tension on the belt here to remove it so that you can take it off without pulling on that rear shaft very much. Once you get that out of the way, you're able to take the front assembly and remove it, and don't forget about the spacer that goes on the rear behind the back plate, and that's what helps keep your belts lined up. At this point, what I want to do is take the opportunity to make sure all of the bolts that hold the transmission cover on are tight. You like to do this by hand because that gives you a feel of how tight they are, and you don't want to strip these out. You want to go ahead and check the shaft and the bottom for any oil or residue that might be in it. At this point, you want to go ahead and find you a table or a workbench to place all your parts on. It's a good thing to get everything moved over and get it disassembled so you can look at it and start to inspect it. Make sure that you have all your parts here. I usually like to lay the front pulley and the variator backing plate and all the portion of the front area of the clutch by itself, and then separate obviously from the rear, which you see here, the belt, the pulley, the slipper clutch, and then the spacer. That way I make sure that I've got all my parts, I haven't dropped anything. At this point we're going to go ahead and separate all of this and make sure while we're doing it that we're kind of inspecting it for damage and looking at see if we see anything odd. Maybe if you identify any kind of cracks or anything, you can do it at that point. Now I use carburetor spray to clean almost everything. So what we do here is just take carburetor spray, wipe the residue out of the inside of the bell, wipe it off of the outside, and then after we get it clean up and most of the debris off of it, we'll go ahead and take sandpaper to it. And this is a fine grit sandpaper, and we're not going to be sanding on any of the metal. What we're trying to do here is just sand off the stubborn residue and the some of the carbon that's built up where the slipper pads have circulated and heated up and left some of that carbon on there. So when we're done here, we'll flash this thing up and you can see how shiny and clean it is and ready to go. And again, you're just trying to knock off that residue and some of the carbon. And as you can see there, how much better that looks. This piece sets against your outer slipper disc and needs to be cleaned very well. This will be one of the things that the outer disc will be sitting against and if there's any residue left on it, might not hold as well, especially under high power applications. So make sure you get it good and clean, and when you're done, sanding it down and spraying it down with some carburetor spray, it should look nice and shiny and very smooth and clean and clear of any residue or any trash or debris left on it. As you can see here, it looks very good. Just putting the finishing touches on the pressure washer or the beveled plate there, and then the nut that goes on the rear. Want to make sure this is clean as well. That's where your inner disc goes, and that goes inside your bell. You want to make sure that you just hit it with some sandpaper. Make sure all the carbon's off. Sometimes this piece will have a lot of burned on carbon from where the clutch has been slipping. Inspect your belt, look it over, make sure there's no cracks, cuts, the edges are not frayed before you put that thing back on. And then finally, the slipper discs themselves. If you don't have a new set, these things can be reworked several times before you have to put a new set in. So you just want to flatten them out. I prefer to do them on a table where it's nice and flat, because you make sure that you're not going to shave one side of that disc off. The front variator needs to be serviced as well. Make sure you clean it very well. That's the outer half there. You don't have to spend a lot of time on that thing, but the inside's going to need a little bit more attention. This is where the rollers are, and this is where you need to make sure this is good and clean, or the rollers may get to where they're not functioning properly. Also, this portion of the pulley moves in and out, and it needs to be clean in order to function correctly. This sleeve needs to be nice and clean. Make sure you spend enough time on it to get it looking really good. Usually will come clean with just carburetor spray or brake parts cleaner. We'll get it nice and clean, but remember that inner portion of that pulley rides on that and moves in and out on that as well. So make sure that's good and clean. Next, you want to just go over your star washer and your nut, outer nut, and some of the things that hold that thing on. Make sure you don't see any damage there. Inspect your rollers. Make sure there are no flat spots. Look at your backing plate. Sometimes these things do crack. You want to make sure you get that thing sprayed off and get it inspected inside and out. Don't use it if it's broke. It's time to order another one, or call your buddy down the street and see if you can borrow one. But in any case, don't be putting that thing back in there if you see damage to it. Clean these off as well, because that's what that backing plate sits on, and that's what they use to slide up and down on that pulley. Usually I like to try to put these things back together so that I don't lose one. Set it off to the side. As you can see here, a lot of trash and debris comes out of that thing, so we've done a good job of getting it clean. Now it's time to start putting it back together. All of my rollers are the same weight, so it doesn't matter which ones go where, as long as none of them are damaged. The backing plate goes on. I usually like to try to sit it on and make sure that it's not going to seize up anywhere, that it's going to move like it's supposed to move. And as you can see here, it does. So, and that's what you want. If it jams up anywhere, you need to look at it, how you've assembled it. So as you start to put everything back together, again, making sure that everything's working like it's supposed to. Now it's going to be time to move on to the rear clutch. We're going to go ahead and take the clutch off and expose the torque spring. You got to be careful here. I'm pressing down really hard. That thing will come off and hit you in the face, and you'll spend the rest of the afternoon at the dentist. So be careful here. Set the spring off to the side there. Make sure this pulley opens and closes with ease. Look at your bearings. Make sure there's no trash in anything there. Here you have your clutch. This particular clutch is a stage 6 clutch with red shoe springs. I don't normally use red shoe springs for this setup, but that's all I had at one point. point, and that's how these ended up in there. But nonetheless, we're going to go ahead and take one out and show you how to get that thing out of there. You just insert your Allen wrench here, back that out, back it out all the way till it nearly falls out. Then you take your needle nose pliers and pull one end of that hook out, and then you pull the other end out, which sometimes can be a little bit of a bear, but if you can get in there and get it worked out, it pops out quite easily most of the time. Okay, as you can see there, that's the makeup of the spring. It has a hook on each end, and then when you go to reinsert your new ones, you do it the same way. Put one end in, use your pliers to guide the other end of the hook in, and it should set right down in there with just a little bit of work. Not too bad there. And then you want to go ahead and put your Allen wrench in and begin to tighten it back up. Now those things are adjustable. You want to make sure you get all three of them the same tension. There's marks on there, as you can see in there just a little bit. Next comes the torque spring. I'll go ahead and get it on there and get it seated as it's supposed to fit. There's a couple different methods to get the clutch back down on there. I usually use a little help to get the nut secured back on there and then get that thing pushed away from me before I let go of it. I don't want that thing to jump off there. If it hits you in the face, you're going to have a rough afternoon, I promise. You're going to go ahead and get the impact wrench back on it, get that thing secured down good and tight like it's supposed to be, and you're ready to go. So look the CVT cover over, make sure there's no damage or cracks to it anywhere, that the belt's not rubbing in any location that it's not supposed to. I have a couple places here, but that's normal for this cover. Go ahead and make sure this bearing is functioning correctly. I usually just put my finger on it and spin it to make sure it's not crunchy and that it is seated correctly. The kicker gear is also something else that gives people fits, and usually they sand down this shaft, but for me and my part, I put WD-40 on it. I've never had any problems. That's the way I've always done it, and I've never experienced any problems with the CVT cover of any fashion using WD-40 here. That shaft doesn't spin, it doesn't move in any way, so normally a little bit of WD-40 on this is not going to hurt it at all. It helps that kicker gear move up and down on that shaft and usually prevents it from having any kind of problems. So, but if you use WD-40 on that gear, make sure you wipe it off, keep it clean, and don't get any of that WD-40 anywhere else in that CVT cover. I'll go ahead after I get it back together and give it a test to make sure that gear is going to slide up and down on the shaft okay without any problems. So now it's time to put it all back together. We're going to go ahead and make sure that the inner half of this front variator is working okay and that everything's seated correctly. Go ahead and put the spacer in that lines up the belt. Now your spacer may be different than mine. You may use a combination of two spacers or thin spacers or thick spacers, but that's really just to line your belt up. Now I use a different method for my rear pulley. As you're going to see here, I use a rubber mallet, which I use a stiff torque spring. So this rubber mallet will help get the belt seated into the pulley. Don't use a regular hammer, because if you do, you're going to damage the outer portion of that pulley, the ring around the edge there, and you don't want to do that. So I just usually go ahead and give that thing a couple of hits to get it down in there and get it lined up so that I can get it over the front portion of the crankshaft pretty easily. And as you can see there, it fits just fine without any problems. Then I'll go ahead and usually give it a squeeze to make sure that there's no extra tension maintaining on that shaft back there in the rear coming from the transmission until I can get the CVT cover on. Now I'm going to put the front variator outer portion back on, make sure it's seated okay, get the star washer in and get it lined up. Sometimes this takes just an extra effort or maybe just another minute to make sure that you get that lined up correctly, because if you get that misaligned and you tighten it up, within just a couple of minutes that thing's going to try to line itself up, which is going to create a little space on that nut, and that thing's going to back its way off, and it's going to come off under the CVT cover. I've seen it happen to a lot of different people. So as you can see here, use one finger to put the pressure on it to make sure that the pressure stays tight, once you get that thing seated. If you let go of that and put the nut on, there's no guarantee that you're getting that thing seated like it should be. So once you find the correct position for it, you need to maintain pressure on it. It's time to put the slipper clutch back on. First thing that's going to go on is your spacer. Now you'll know if you forget this spacer because as soon as you kick it and the quad starts, it's going to take off with you. So if that happens, then you might as well take it back apart and put your spacer back in there. So the inner portion goes on after the spacer, your inner disc. Once you put your inner disc on, go ahead and put your bell on. It's clean, ready to go. Slide the bell on, and then another disc. So once your disc goes on, make sure it stays up there. You may have to use 2 hands to keep a little bit of pressure up there, and that's going to be your outer plate that sits against your slipper disc. Now it has grooves. It has to line up in and kind of fits up in there only in one position. So you may have to move that thing around a little bit till it gets in the right position. But then this washer lines everything up. Go ahead and put your nut on there. Keep a little pressure so that everything stays lined up. If you've let off before you get that tight, it's a good chance that that plate may slip out of alignment in there. So make sure you keep good pressure on it. Get the nut good and tight by hand, and it's ready to put on with an impact. So, and my impact is an 18-volt DeWalt, and I run it up till it locks itself out. So never had anything get too tight. On occasion this nut in the back will strip, but that's normal. I think most people carry additional nuts, but you want to run that nut down until that plate flattens out. Don't over tighten it, and you're ready to put it back together. So put your CVT cover back on, make sure everything's lined up correctly. So sometimes it can be a bear to get the CVT cover on. Really what you're trying to do is align that shaft, the rear shaft, into the rear bearing. I do run the center bolt, so I put that in first, and I start all my bolts by hand first because I've had a couple that I've cross-threaded at times in the past, so it's just a habit to get into. And that's about it. Once you get the bolts back in, you're done. The CVT is ready to go. If there's of course any problems, you can always pull that CVT cover off and re-inspect everything, but if you follow those simple steps, you should be good to go. If you every couple of races take that thing off and service it just like that, your CVT should have a long life and your slipper clutch should do its job. Thank you.